By Greg Porter. September 8 at 12:15 p.m. Visualization of Florence at hurricane strength on Wednesday. Earth.nullshul.net. The odds of a major hurricane making landfall along the U.S. East Coast next week keep growing. Forecast models paint an increasingly grim picture, converging on a track that would have what is currently Tropical Storm Florence making a direct hit as a powerful hurricane somewhere along the U.S. southeast coast. That said, potential U.S. landfall is still several days away, and Florence's ultimate track and intensity are not yet set in stone, with still a small chance that it meanders just off the east coast and then curls out to sea. As of 11 a.m. Saturday morning, Florence bears no resemblance to the beastly storm that it will eventually become. Florence remains a tropical storm with maximum sustained winds of 65 miles per hour and located some 1,500 miles east of the U.S. mainland, slowly tracking to the west at less than 10 miles per hour. Infrared satellite imagery shows Florence starting to regain a more uniform circular structure, a sign of strengthening. Florence likely to regain hurricane status shortly. Over the last 36 hours, Florence weakened from a hurricane to a tropical storm as the system encountered hostile conditions in the central Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, the environment that Florence is about to move into is extremely favorable for rapid strengthening, thanks to warmer than average sea surface temperatures and low wind shear, the change in wind direction, or speed with height. As a result, the National Hurricane Center expects Florence to regain hurricane status within the next 24 hours and intensify to a major hurricane, Category 3 or higher, by Tuesday. Sea surface temperature anomalies over the Atlantic Ocean. Ocean temperatures are running several degrees warmer than normal at the moment. NOAA. In fact, the Hurricane Center predicts Florence will reach Category 4 strength Tuesday and remain at the intensity until Thursday, leading up to landfall. Risk of U.S. landfall is rising as Florence enters a region favorable to rapid intensification. The storm will continue to track almost due west, likely passing just south of Bermuda by early next week. Historically speaking, the path that Florence is likely to carve out is a highly unusual one. As Capital Weather Gang's tropical weather expert Brian McNulty pointed out yesterday, since 1851, 79 tropical systems tracked close to Florence's current location, and not one of those storms made a U.S. landfall, with a vast majority remaining well offshore. Get anomalous blocks, get anomalous surprises. Euro ridging off mid-Atl is maxing out compared to the 30 years database. Credit goes to @BURGWX number Florence pic. Twitter.com OXGE8LSOR7, James Hyde, @WoxMeddler, September 8, 2018. However, models indicate a historically strong ridge of high pressure will develop in the western Atlantic just as Florence closes in on the U.S. If it verifies, this incredibly strong high-pressure system would likely prevent Florence from recurving to the north and out to sea. There is still some uncertainty in the strength and position of the high pressure, though, and thus in the ultimate track and intensity of the storm. Best chance of landfall is in the Carolinas, but entire East Coast still at risk. Most model simulations now show Florence making landfall along the U.S. East Coast as a major hurricane between Wednesday and Friday of the coming week. This kind of model agreement is plenty reason enough to start sounding the alarm for the millions of people along the East Coast who may be impacted by the storm. However, the exact track, intensity, and landfall location of the storm is impossible to know this far out, and as shown by some of the blue tracks below, there's still an outside chance the storm could meander just offshore and then curl back out to sea. Group of simulations from American, blue, and European, red, computer models from Friday. Each color strand represents a different model simulation with slight tweaks to initial conditions. Note that the strands are clustered together, where the forecast track is most confident, but they diverge where the course of the storm is less certain. The thick bold red line is the average of all of the European model simulations, while the blue is the average of all the American model simulations. The thinner bold, red and blue, lines are the main or operational simulations from each model. StormVistaOxmetals.com. Even if Florence remains just offshore, dangerous surf, beach erosion and flooding would be likely along portions of the coast, along with wind and rain. Inland effects would be less severe in this scenario, although it is among the least likely. Based on current information and model guidance, we assign the following landfall likelihoods: 50% chance of landfall in the Carolinas, 15% chance of landfall between Virginia Beach and Delmarva, 15% chance of landfall between Central Florida and Georgia, 10% chance of landfall in the Northeast, 10% chance if the storm curves out to sea. All of the above scenarios anticipate Florence being a hurricane at the time of landfall, with a strong chance if the storm is a major hurricane, Category 3 or higher. Major impacts possible up and down the East Coast. Obviously, the worst impacts from the storm will occur closest to its ultimate landfall location, with storm surge, wind damage and torrential rain representing the biggest hazards. That said, residual impacts from Florence could be felt up and down the East Coast and over inland areas as well over several days. In particular, after a very wet summer, much of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions would face a significant flood threat from Florence even after the storm moves ashore. Rainfall